All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our first webinar, Ask Me Anything Today, what on Science Says. My name is Beatrice Zatorska. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Science Says, an online platform, science communication platform for run and owned by scientists, where we share facts, evidence-based, reliable information on food science in plain English, easy to explain, and practical tips for food professionals and general public. Basically, we are creating community for all people passionate about food, and from designing recipes to marketing, cooking, and sustainability, and also how food has an impact on climate change. Today, our first guest is Bryan Quoc. Hi, Bryan.
Hi there.
Bryan is a PhD level food scientist, absolutely amazing person who has introduced us to his magical world of flavor and taste. Bryan has a 6 years experience working with lots of professionals in the food industry, startups and other companies. He's an amazing storyteller, and he has wrote a very good book, 150 food science questions answered, which for me was a really eye-opening introduction to the world of flavor. Very clever written. It's like a cookbook, but with a twist. I always like good food and drink, but actually after reading your book, Bryan, you took me to a very different level, but we'll come back to this in a minute. I want you to take over, introduce yourself, but with my first very simple question. Why food science? Why did you choose to become a food scientist?
Yeah, so I started off my journey in chemistry, and I was very focused in college on chemistry, and I loved every moment of it. But at the end of my my first year, or my senior year, I realized I was trying to find something different that I wanted to do, and I wasn't sure what it was yet. The year before, my father passed away. And so I decided to go on a journey of walking across the country for 2,000 miles. So I started in California and I walked all the way to Louisiana. And through that journey, I realized the importance of food. I mean, it would make sense. You know, I spent a lot of my days just eating the same thing over and over again. And I'd go into all these grocery stores in the United States and everything would be exactly the same. And it was really hard because if I ate something that didn't sit well, or something that had too much salt or too much sugar, it really impacted how far I could walk that day. And so I had to choose very simple things to eat. And they were very bland, very difficult to sustain over 6 months. At the end of the day, I realized, there was something that I needed to do about the food system that we were living in. But I was also slated to go to Stanford for a PhD in chemistry and a master's in medicine. But when I arrived there, I spent a lot of my time just working with food and playing around with food. And I realized I needed to find a different path. So I left that program. Meandered a little bit and then realized that there was food science. Like food science was an actual program. So I applied, and that's its own journey.
Wow, what a story. The inspiration to become food scientist. Actually, you mentioned something. You discovered that there is food science. It's interesting you say. And also another question I wanted to ask you anyway. What is about food science now? We have, before Science Says, we had a different platform for scientists to network with industry professionals called Smart Tribe. And we had 20,000 people on our platform networking and talking to each other. And this was in the middle of COVID. So you would think, oh, everybody's going to talk about vaccinations, about immunity, so on. Indeed, 60% of people on our platform were from life science. But the biggest traffic was food science. I mean, this is why we decided to open Science Says with first focus on food science. So what's going on? That everybody is talking about food science. It's also a new kind of area of science, I suppose. I think it was recognized only 10 years ago or so, officially. But everybody wants to know about food. I mean, there's lacking of information. What is making it so hot right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and food science really is a young field, a young discipline. I mean, it only came out in the middle of the 20th century. As food became more complex, as we applied more science and technology to it, things became more difficult to understand. And so we needed specialists. We needed people to understand, the flavor. We needed someone to understand the texture. We needed someone to understand the nutrition. And I think, as we grow larger as a planet, as our population explodes, it's becoming more difficult to, feed everyone, especially if you do so in a timely manner. I think there's a lot of issues and a lot of challenges, and food science is, I think, really here to stay because, now we have synthetic biology, and now we have cellular agriculture, and we have, people wanting clean labels, and that requires a lot more, technical know-how than maybe a few decades ago, when really we're just trying to figure out what was the tastiest chip, right?
That's right, and it seems that there's a lot also misinformation. It's a lack of information, lack of education on food science and food in general. But there's also misinformation. I mean, this is the reason why we have Science Says, because we want this, fact-based insights. Do you come across also that there is a lack of information and not only and miscommunication, a lot of fake news about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what happens is that, a lot of what we know about food is typically just conveyed to us by the people that we know. And it's not verified. It's not evidence-based. There's not rigorous understanding. And I think everyone thinks they understand food because, a lot of it, everyone eats. Many of us cook. However, the problem is that when you dig into the research literature, a lot of these terms, a lot of this understanding is not easily conveyed. So, and it's behind paywalls, it's behind, university tuition. Very few people understand it. And there's not a lot of emphasis on trying to convey more of that knowledge to the public. And I think that's really where we're seeing a lot of that misinformation, especially when it comes to additives and ingredients and, and processes. I would say, if you talk about the dichotomy between artificial and natural, it depends on the time scale. If you think about it, using fire to cook is very unnatural. What organism does that? We are the only organism that takes fire, and we've only had it for 2 million years. So we're constantly adapting to our environment, and things like fermentation, things like salting and drying. These have only come out in the last tens of thousands of years. So we're constantly innovating and learning what is new in terms of creating new foods.
I know this is something which is very close to your heart, and you do want to dig in more about it. And you write from time to time on Science Says Insights. I'm going to quote you because you are very passionate about the relationship between taste, human evolution, cooking food, and discovery on fire. You have to tell me more about it. What is all behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been learning that there's so many interesting interactions and connections between our ability to taste food, what we need as a species, and how we may have developed in terms of our evolution. There's a professor at Harvard, Richard Graham. He talks about how cooking may be one of the reasons why we were able to develop such a large brain, mostly because there was new nutrition. It improved our ability to digest a lot of different foods. It also improved the food safety and quality of foods. You're able to kill off a lot of bacteria. And so we didn't have to spend as much time and energy trying to find food. Unlike our, primate cousins who are constantly chewing, spending a lot of time eating. that's what they had to do. So we had more time to do other things and develop our, our society and culture, and, essentially evolve from there. And I've learned how there's a lot of different nutrients in food that get changed during the process of cooking. There's a reaction called the Maillard reaction, in which sugars and amino acids react together and they form a number of different compounds. And many of those actually are toxic. And so after spending, 2 million years essentially eating toxic foods, our bodies have adapted to that. There's this theory that maybe our microbiome has actually evolved with us, naturally selected with us to adjust to these new compounds formed during cooking. And that may be one of the reasons why we've lived so long, is because a lot of these compounds are similar to the ones formed during the process of aging. So our bodies are built for living longer, possibly through the process of cooking.
Wow, that's super interesting. Leads me to your book, actually. I want to very briefly go ask you a question now. The 150 food science question answered, and indeed, there's a lot of fascinating, you're asking questions and a good answer. Why we eat salt, a lot of connection between indeed the ingredients, the processes, the fire, the saltiness, the bitterness, a lot of savoury flavors, which I know is your favorite topic. Also, you adding a lot of cultural flavor to it. And when I closed the book, when I finished the book, it left me with a thrilling emotions. What a future is ahead of us in terms of food. Because having all that knowledge coming from science, how much is possible actually to do going forward, along with developing the sustainability of food as well, living sustainability, but also developing new flavors and sensation. So that was for me. I'm a generalist, I'm not a scientist, but it was really eye-opening. And now actually eating is a very different experience for me, but it's my personal opinion. If you can tell us a little bit about the book, who it is for, and what you're writing about.
Yeah, I mean, what was surprising is that I wrote that book actually from the request of the publisher. They reached out to me and asked me to write the book, so they sort of had a intention in mind. I think ultimately that book is for people who have an interest in science but are looking to develop their understanding of food through that lens. And it turns out that I gained a lot of attention from people with kids and young teenagers and that sort of thing, that they wanted to, these parents who wanted to teach their kids more about science. And I was like, oh, that's great. I can't believe, I didn't even think of that people like that were reading the book to their kids. So that was a really amazing experience because, like I said, we all eat, many of us cook. So we're constantly interacting with food, but it's so complex and complicated that, we're only just learning some of the nuances of food. So when I think of it in terms of the future, I think in terms of, we really took food to a new level in this century, because now we have the ability to create more or less anything. We can create new proteins, we can create new flavors, we can create a lot of different molecules using synthetic biology and cellular agriculture. I think in the next century, we're going to see a lot of transformation in terms of what the food system is, and it's going to become very complex. There's going to be a lot of issues in terms of legal, like how do you define food? What is food? Chemically, food has so many molecules and compounds, and we take it for granted that nature has really designed food in a beautiful way, and really we've learned to adapt to that. But now we are, we're kind of the Victor Frankenstein, like we can create our own foods out of nothing, and that's scary but also very exciting. And I think, like any technology, there's a double-edged sword. So we can either use this technology to make the most addictive food in the world, and have people eat that. Or we can use the technology to really fully understand what it means to be a human that eats food, and uses science and technology to produce that.
There are already questions for you coming in, but I have another 10 minutes to ask mine. So, but I want to ask you, your passion in particular is the flavors, savoury flavors, and you have been working with different startups, companies as a consultant. So you are very close to the developments in the industry and the challenges they are facing. What are the most common currently interesting topics and challenging the food industry is facing, given to your expertise?
Yeah, I think when it comes to taste and flavor, spoilage is, primary on top. And that's because if you think about it, even if a food is safe in all respects and regards, people will want to eat something that does not taste good at the end of the day, regardless of what it is, whether it's healthy, whether it's, it hasn't yet expired. We are so built for good taste that I think that's something to consider as far as how does a product last? What is its shelf life? What can you do to preserve that taste and making sure that people enjoy it? Because I don't know about you, but I go out and look for good food. I look for good, tasty food, and then I think that is an important part of our species. Is that's how we evolved and survived, is we found tasty, delicious food, and now we have a abundance of it, and we need to know how to take responsibility for that.
What in the next 3 to 5 years, what do you think are going to be the most thrilling developments in the food sector?
I think the use of artificial intelligence to fully map out taste. One of the challenges that the food industry faces is that we taste subjectively, right? So you need trained flavorists to actually go through every combination. You need trained sensory panelists to eat foods and create a quantitative data from that. But as we have more models and as we develop our models better, I believe that we can quantify every relationship and connection that we have to taste and flavor. And by doing so, we can harness the power of machine learning and artificial intelligence to create foods with optimized taste and flavor. And I think that's actually really exciting to me, because that means that we can take foods that are healthy and essentially reprogram their taste and flavor, whether that's on the genetic level, whether that's using enzymes, whether that's using different processes.
Interesting. We actually have quite a few data scientists who joined recently our platform as the audience, as your subscribers, and now explains why they do need to learn about the industry as well. Another very interesting and hot topic is sustainability, food and sustainability. What does it mean for you to live in a sustainable way and in relation to food?
I think it's really important to close the loop on food. We waste a lot of food, at least in the United States. I think nearly a third of our food goes to the landfill. And again, that's a problem of spoilage. And I also think it's a problem of taste. Bread that is stale, which is perfectly fine as far as the food safety element, is considered bad because it's not edible. So we need to close the loop in terms of what can we do with all this food that we spent so much energy, so many resources producing, and then it just simply goes to the landfill. We need to find a way to harness back those resources, because at the end of the day, we're going to keep churning up, all the nutrients in the soil that's going to go into our food, and then it's just going to live in the landfill, and we can't really, recoup a lot of those costs back.
I want to ask you about your favorite topics. I mean, savoury flavors is the big big family, a big general word. You know, on Science Says, as a team, we on our Slack channel, we have a bot which every time we're publishing something, we have a notification telling us. So we can immediately read it. And, what, really? It's I can tell everyone reading, following Bryan is addictive and is eye-opening. And you're writing a lot about umami. You're writing a lot recently about meat alternatives, about dairy project, about to make bread. I mean, everything is so interesting, fascinating. A lot of it's a good knowledge and good to know. And a lot of it is just practical, really precise, good information for anyone who is involved with the food production or cooking in general. So it's a great resource. What are your 3 favorite topics? I mean, I'm sure umami is going to be number 1.
I mean, umami, right? I love the concept of umami. It's the only taste bud that actually has synergy between different compounds. You know, you can add 2 things and get 10 times back, right? Like that's, to me, is fantastic. And I think that speaks to what we human beings in terms of our physiology find important, because umami is a trigger for both amino acids as well as ribonucleotides, and we need tons of that in our bodies. So that probably means that we really love the taste of those things together. And then and then my second favorite topic is you know, what can we do with enzymes, right? I think enzymes are amazing powerhouses. There's been a lot of work in terms of optimizing enzymes. I think one of the Nobel Prizes in chemistry was awarded to how to use natural selection and evolution to develop new enzymes that function in new ways. And I think that would be, to me, the future, is using enzymes to rationally process and develop our foods. I think that would be an amazing next thing in terms of the next century. And then my third favorite topic is space food. I mean, we've got Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, flying into space, and the truth is, as much as it's, some people have critiques against that, I think there is something very important about humans in being able to explore the universe. I think that, as a species, that's how we survive, is we were always traveling, we were always wandering. And I'm a wanderer. I think of myself as a wanderer. From my walk, I feel a sense of adventure and appreciation for any way or shape or form in which humans push themselves and find themselves in ways and opportunities to discover new things. And I think food is going to play a huge role in that. How do you produce food? How do you make food on a spaceship? And there's so many fascinating papers that NASA developed. They were able to make food molecules from hydrogen and oxygen and carbon dioxide. It's fantastic read. It's a fantastic read, and you realize how much we've come so far as far as our technology.
Wow. Super interesting. I have the image of a Matt Damon from the movie Martian developing his own garden, which he blew, I think, later. And my last question before we start taking questions, so please bring them, come in. Your top tips to anyone who is cooking, how to enhance your cooking to make your food more tasty and give more flavors.
Absolutely. Just using the principle of umami and pair ingredient pairing. There's a lot of knowledge out there and research that shows that foods that have very similar chemical composition, when you combine them together, they make food taste better. And so there's actually some really interesting websites that you can plug in your food ingredients and they'll tell you the chemical composition and they'll tell you if they pair well together. So that's a very interesting new way that we can interact with the digital world in our food.
Very, very good. So pairing different food more cleverly to know to enhance your experience.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we'll start taking some questions, and God help me, I'm gonna to. Can you read? Can you see the questions as well, Brian?
I have to pull up my computer to do that.
Okay, don't worry. Okay, so we have the first question from Gia. Does toasting a grain gelatinize the scratches, or is the addition of water necessary to do that?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
I was more about that. Does toasting a grain gelatinize the scratches?
Oh, nice.
Yes?
Yeah.
Or is the addition of water necessary to do that?
The addition of water will be necessary in order to gelatinize that grain, because that gelatinization occurs when water molecules intercalate between the starch. If you're just toasting the grain without the presence of water, you essentially activate the Maillard reaction, and the amino acids and proteins will just react with any free sugars inside that grain.
Thank you for this. And next questions first by Anjinka. Hi, Brian. How can we use koji in commercial scale to reduce food waste and tap into non-conventional food sources like insects? Sure.
Yeah, I think koji is, so for those who don't know, koji is a type of Japanese mold. The species is known as Aspergillus oryzae. And the Japanese and Chinese have been using this mold for thousands of years, but we understand it so much better now. And I believe that there is a potential to use koji to essentially harness its enzymes. It releases a lot of proteases, a lot of lipases, and amylases, which can break down sugars, proteins, and fats. And I think we could use those enzymes to take food waste and break it down into its constituent parts. So if you have, you can inoculate food waste with these molds, break it down, and then use that broken down nutrients to forge new foods, essentially, and perhaps maybe for animal agriculture, perhaps as a substrate for fermentation, yeast fermentation, bacterial fermentation, and then we can sort of save a little bit of those resources and plug them back into the cycle. When it comes to insects, I think that there's definitely a huge possibility there, because insects are they have a huge number of proteins and amino acids. I think you can use koji enzymes and any enzymes to improve the taste and flavor of insects and really redesign food from that standpoint.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions which were sent to us earlier as well. One was from a food startup looking into meat alternatives. Okay, can you tell a little bit more about the development of meat alternatives? What are the best ingredients, ways, processes, and in general how this whole industry, because it's a massive industry right now, is developing, and what is the future of it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many possibilities right now, and it's hard to know where we're going to be in the next 5-10 years. You have your soy-based meat alternatives, you have your algae-based and seaweed-based meat alternatives, you have your mushroom-based meat alternatives. The sky's the limit. I think really the truth is that you're going to need a combination of everything together, because, for example, mushrooms, they contain so many umami molecules. They have that meatiness in them already. Shiitake mushrooms are notoriously have a meaty flavor because of their glutamic acid content, as well as their ribonucleotide content. And then you want to combine that with the flavoring compounds found in seaweed, which also is very rich in glutamic acid, and that paired with the texture and the quality of the protein in soy would really give you sort of that combination. And then the rest of it is really playing around with different processes to, the Maillard reaction would be used to induce the production of meaty flavors, savory flavors. Again, like I was saying, the texturizing processes are important to make sure that it actually has the texture of meat. So that, I think, the sky's the limit. We're just trying to learn to be more and more creative in terms of what we can do with what we have on right now in terms of our technology.
So the meat alternatives industry, let's say, do you think it's right at the start of its journey because there's so much possibilities going forward? I mean, to be honest, the taste of a lot of the meat alternatives are not great yet.
Right. I think that right now we're kind of in a middle zone where we have our meat alternatives, but then we're also developing, a lot of money is going into cellular agriculture. And I do think that it's going to be a combination of the two, where, the bulk of the actual substrate is going to be something that's plant-based. And then you're going to pair it with products that are produced in a laboratory of cellular agriculture.
Okay, thank you very much, Bryan. Some more questions from Sergio. I've seen a lot of savory foods use in sodium glutamine to enhance its flavor. Can you use the same additive in sweet products?
Unfortunately, glutamic acid has an issue, which is that it really does amplify the savory aspects of sweet foods. So there are ways to do it, and they're a little complex because you have to create what they're called are conjugates. So it's glutamic acid combined with a molecule of sugar, either it's fructose or glucose, and that gives you sort of like a paired up combination. But unfortunately, when you put glutamic acid in, say, a soda or in milk, really you're just seeing the savory notes get amplified. So you kind of wonder if you're tasting some kind of soup. But certain types of foods are amenable to the addition of glutamic acid, like tomatoes. Tomatoes may be sweet, but they also have a savoriness to them, and they are actually chock full of glutamic acid. So you can actually increase the level of glutamic acid in those without causing a weird flavor defect.
There's a follow-up question from Sergio. How do you approach the development of new product in terms of flavor, aimed to specific group of people, for example, Germans, Italian, Japanese, and so on?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I haven't had the chance, to be honest, personally. I know that what flavor companies do and flavor houses do, they have teams go out to those countries and interact with the local culture and the local food scene, and they sit down and they really take note what are the enhancing flavors, and they talk in terms of chemicals, right? They talk about like, okay, well, that note is probably induced by these series of compounds, and that note is induced by these series of compounds, and so they're called, I believe they're called flavor trips. And so, the large flavor houses invest heavily in determining what people actually like and what's trending in specific culture and cuisines.
I have read in your book that you different flavors, different people react very differently. Some don't like it, dislike it. Is it cultural background, the way how we used to it? Like in Europe, we look, my mom was here last week, and the only question she had in the kitchen, more butter, more garlic, that's it.
I like that.
So it has a lot of impact. There's a question about umami. How do you give salads maximum umami? Any secret umami-rich salad dressing?
Umami-rich salad dressing. That's a good question. I there's actually equations for this, right? So you can actually, pinpoint the concentration of different ingredients and determine how they amplify the umami taste. The two compounds that I would recommend in creating a salad dressing with that is, certainly shiitake mushrooms. Certainly, I actually think that's more or less enough. But then you can also add a yeast extract or nutritional yeast, which has a lot of those compounds, those glutamic acids, the ribonucleic acids, as well as other peptides and proteins that add flavor.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian. I was going to close, but now we have one more question. What are your thoughts on the potential of decouple flavor and texture using food 3D printing?
Interesting. Can you repeat that question one more time?
What are your thoughts on the potential of decouple flavor and texture using food 3D printing?
Is that word decouple?
Yes, decouple.
Oh man, that's really challenging. Yeah, unfortunately, I think flavor and taste really come together with texture. So that would be very fascinating to see if you can figure out a way to separate those two phenomenon. I'm sure there's definitely possibilities, and people way smarter than me will probably figure that out. But yeah, that's an interesting thought to study those different phenomenon using 3D printing to create different textures and flavor phenomenon. That would be interesting. Yeah.
There's another question. How does temperature, texture, color, and cutlery affects the perception of flavor?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of interesting effects of color on sweetness. So the color red, like Coca-Cola, as you can imagine, color red actually amplifies sweetness, and it's very strange. Like this is actually a scientific phenomenon, as well as smooth surfaces. It like being able to see and touch smooth surfaces also makes you feel like things are sweeter. I don't know why. There's a lot of these weird quirks in our physiology and neurology that the food companies have taken and used, but those are some of the first thoughts I have. And apparently loud noises amplify umami, soft noises in music amplify sweetness. So there's a lot of these weird tricks and processes that occur in our brain that you can kind of take advantage of. So if you ever decide to have a nice date, you can really play some rock music. If you've got something like a nice steak, amplify those umami notes.
Wow, there's a lot of science into it. So here we go. The coffee shops making mistake, putting everything, because actually it should be very smooth, with gentle music, and people want more sweeteners, right?
Yeah, be red.
It's red. Here we go. And how does we have a question from Reed? How does here we go. I know it's one of your favorite topic. How does the Maillard reaction occur in foods such as meat that are supposed to have 0G net carbs, 0G net carbs, if sugar is required for the reaction to happen?
Yeah, so we actually have a large percentage of what are known as glycoproteins, as well as the ribonucleotides have sugar moieties or sugar molecules attached to them. So there's a lot of these like hidden sugars in a sense that are found in the meat itself, as well as there's some percentage of glycogen that's still embedded in the meat tissue. And that gets broken down slowly as the meat ages and after the animal has been killed. And that forms a small number of free sugars. So those can participate in the Maillard reaction. but a lot of that is really amplified by the high percentage of proteins and amino acids found in the meat itself.
Thank you, Brian. I have one more, the second question, which came earlier. So if anybody has more questions, please send it now. What is your take on, there's a lot of money being invested, especially in the US and in Silicon Valley, in food startups. Some years ago, Huel came along. It's a company I'm sure you come across, which started producing like a kind of smoothie full of proteins, everything what you needed. And the approach is that you don't like cooking, you don't have cooking, you just quickly grab something and eat and so on. And the question is, will that really replace our meals? Because we are so attached to exactly flavors, experience, not about a quick smoothie, which gives you a meal for the whole day.
Yeah, I mean, if you follow Soylent's trajectory, you'll see that the original founder, he's no longer part of the company, and I think his original premise, which is that he didn't like to cook. He was an engineer by training, and he really just wanted to hack food to make it easier for him to use it as fuel and as a process. I think at the end of the day, food has been with us even longer than we have existed as a species. Everything eats, right? Like that's one of the defining features of being an organism. Whether you eat your own, faux synthetic sugars that you produce as a plant, or you eat through the production of mycelia, and you decay things around you, or as an animal, you consume things. It's hardwired into our brains and our bodies, and even astronauts need tasty food, right? You can see this in terms of the evolution of space food from NASA, that they're increasingly more complex and interesting and tasty, not less. So it's a profound psychological impact to eat the same thing over and over again. And I think there's some interesting studies that suggest that our species has survived because we get bored very easily eating the same thing. We are always looking for new things to eat that improves our nutrition, that expands our capacity to fill in new niches. And I think in our ancestors, when they weren't eating new things, they've left and moved on. So it's important for us to have the complexity and the variety and the interesting factors that are in food today.
The flavor. There's one more question came through. Do you think that food waste treated with enzymes could be a good alternative for liquid culture for cultured meat?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think one of the challenges there is, if you can find a way to ensure that the food waste is transported and kept, microbiologically safe, and then finding a process to, you could probably pasteurize or sterilize it. It's a possibility, but you are still missing a number of different elements, such as the growth hormones. Those still need to be included. The nutrients themselves, the carbohydrates and the amino acids, they're actually not the most costly or important aspect. They're important. The cells need those to survive, but there's a lot of ways to get to that. And produce those. It's really the growth hormones and a number of different factors that induce the cells to differentiate into the types of cells that we can call meat, essentially.
One more question I was left before I was asked to was about fermentation. We've seen it's another early stage startup looking into developing some products in fermented products. we see kind of come back. Used to be the grandmother food, but we see a lot of new products on the supermarket shops, but also in the new producers, like family-run businesses producing fermented food. It's if you can tell us more about it. This is a trend. What are the reasons for it? Is about the reasons for it is about the probiotics, healthy guts, or is just a fashion? If you can tell us more about it?
Yeah, I mean, we've fermented foods for thousands of years. And, I think as humans, we love to experiment with fermentation. Bread is so essential to almost every culture. That's a source of fermentation. We produce so many different types of beers and wines and and there's a lot of foods that are fermented that we actually don't know that is fermented. I only personally discovered that soy sauce was fermented a few years ago. I had no idea. So it's not so much that is this a trend or is this something that we're going to see more of? But I think it's just a part of us, and we're just seeing new ways in which we see it on the grocery shelves, and there's something intimate about humans and bacteria and other microorganisms. We still harness them today to produce most of our food. It's just that we don't know it, right? We extract enzymes and we use those to produce flavors. We a lot of cheese is just enzymes, right? And microorganisms. So it's fermentation, I think, will always be here to stay. I think it's a very easy technology. It's something that we understand and know how to do fairly well. And I think it fits in with the clean label movement. It fits in with the health and wellness movement. I think people really like the idea of, this is what grandma used to do. And there's a lot of studies on the safety of fermented foods.
And my very last question, it's indeed going to be lead about the connection between flavors and health. I had a very interesting chat recently with the owner of an organic food producer in the US, who was blamed actually the lack of education. Problems of health in the United States is a problem of education about food and how to eat healthy. Do you believe the knowledge of food, not just science food, but also the flavors, how to cook, and what is nutrition, and so on, will have a gradual impact on health? This is obviously the truth, but how fast this will change, and people will indeed follow the trends of to eat sustainability, the plant-based cuisine, kitchen, organic food, and so on, or because the habit of eating sugary, fatty fast food is really, really strong still in the society.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a complex issue. I would say that you're always going to see a spectrum, right? I think there is something to be said about the convenience, the easy availability, and really the easy low cost of processing convenience foods and fast foods. Those are, that's why they can sell them at the price that they do, because there's so many. There's factors that go well beyond what you see at the kitchen table. Like supply chain issues, the ability to transport, the ability, this is something that I work with clients all the time. My specialty is in natural and organic foods, helping them formulate. And it's really hard because, we have a more limited set of tools and ingredients that we can use. So that means that we have to be more creative in terms of what can we do to ensure that food it doesn't spoil, or it stays tasty, or it retains its nutrition. And I think that will always involve a slightly higher cost. One of the things that I feel unfortunate about with the trend of organic and natural foods and fresher foods and produce is that there's more food waste too, right? Because you can't use the whole gamut of preservation technologies. And so I actually think it's a lot more complicated and complex than, okay, we can just all eat this way, or we can all eat in, a natural way. I don't actually know what natural means now that we live in, this current, state of our society and technology. And I think it's an ongoing discussion and trying to understand what are the factors in terms of nutrition that impact us. What can we say we can let go of and replace with this, and what can we say is essential? I struggle with that every day with my clients, and helping them develop foods that I hope is safe for their children and for themselves, and is also healthy and nutritious.
Fantastic. Bryan, thank you so much. It's always pleasure speaking to you, and interesting, fascinating. Anyone who's got more questions to Bryan, please ask him. Just ask him directly on Science Says. You can just ping him. First, read his interesting stories. We are totally addicted to.
I'm sorry for that.
And I hope I will see you all again. Bryan, thank you so much. Have a great day, and speak to you soon.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Bye, Bryan.